Never pick up strangers. Growing up, my father always warned me about the dangers of the road. Never pick up strangers, he'd say with a stern expression. His words lingered in my mind but didn't mean much to me until that one unforgettable night. I was driving home from college for the weekend, taking the familiar back roads through dense forests and narrow winding paths. The journey was usually peaceful, a time for reflection, but that night a thunderstorm was brewing, and the road was treacherous. Around midnight, the rain started coming down hard, turning the drive into a stressful ordeal. As I carefully navigated a particularly tricky curve, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. A lone figure standing by the road, drenched with an outstretched thumb. My father's warning echoed in my ears, but the human side of me couldn't bear to leave someone stranded in a storm like that. Reluctantly, I pulled over. "Hey there, need a lift?" I called out, cracking the window just enough to speak. The stranger approached, a middle-aged man with a wild beard and piercing eyes. "Yes, please," he said, his voice quivering. "Just to the next town." I hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door. He climbed in, thanking me profusely. I noticed an odd smell, a mixture of dampness and something else, something foul. As we drove, I attempted to make conversation, asking where he was headed. His responses were short and evasive, and he seemed to be eyeing me nervously. The warning bells in my head were ringing louder now, but it was too late to turn back. The rain was coming down in sheets, thunder crashing as the stranger began to tell me a story. It was about a man who'd lost everything, betrayed by those he loved, left to wander the roads in search of redemption. The story was strange and filled with dark, twisted turns, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. I noticed that the stranger was clutching a small weathered book, reading from it intermittently as he spoke. The way he described the events, the emotions he conveyed, it was almost as if he were reliving them. As we approached the next town, I felt a growing unease. There was something off about the stranger, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. And then, as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw it. His reflection was not his own. It was twisted and distorted, the face of another man, younger, filled with rage and sorrow. My heart pounded in my chest, and I struggled to keep control of the car. I knew I had to get away from him, but how? In a moment of inspiration, I remembered the old gas station up ahead, a familiar stop on my journey. It was my chance to escape. As I pulled into the station, I told the stranger that I needed to fill up and use the restroom. He simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the book in his hands. I stumbled out of the car, my legs weak, and rushed into the station. The attendant looked up, concern in his eyes as I explained the situation. "You picked up a hitchhiker?" he asked incredulously. "On this road? Haven't you heard the stories?" He told me about a local legend, a man who'd gone mad after losing his family, wandering the roads, preying on unsuspecting drivers. They said he carried a book with him, a journal filled with his darkest thoughts and fears. The color drained from my face as I realized the truth. I'd picked up a ghost, a tormented soul reliving his tragedy. We called the police, but when they arrived, the car was empty, the stranger gone without a trace. The only evidence of his presence was the book he'd left behind, filled with the ramblings of a broken mind. I never took that road again, haunted by the memory of that night. My father's words ring truer now than ever. Never pick up strangers. And to you, dear friends, gathered around this campfire, I pass on this warning. Be careful whom you trust, especially on a dark and stormy night. For there are things on the road that defy explanation, ghosts of the past that continue to wander, seeking solace, seeking revenge. A voice in the night. Hitchhiking was never something I'd thought I'd do, especially not at night. But sometimes desperation leads us down paths we never thought we'd take. I'd been visiting a friend in a rural town and missed the last bus back to the city. My phone was dead and I was stranded miles away from home. The streets were deserted and the air was filled with a chilling silence that seemed to echo my own loneliness. With no other option, I decided to try my luck at hitchhiking. Standing by the roadside, I felt a sense of foreboding wash over me. The night was pitch black, and the only sound was the distant howl of the wind. Time seemed to stretch on forever, and I began to lose hope. Then, just as I was about to give up, a car approached, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I waved my arms, and to my relief, the car pulled over. The driver was a young man around my age with kind eyes and a friendly smile. He introduced himself as Tom and offered to give me a lift to the nearest train station. Grateful, I climbed into the car and we set off. Tom was easy to talk to, and as we drove, we chatted about our lives and interests. The conversation flowed naturally, and I began to feel more at ease. As we continued down the winding road, Tom turned on the radio, and a soft melody filled the car. We both fell into a comfortable silence, enjoying the music and the rhythmic sound of the car's engine. Then, suddenly, a voice broke through the tranquility, a voice that sent a chill down my spine. "Tom, why did you leave me?" the voice whispered, filled with a sorrow that seemed to reach into my very soul. I turned to Tom, my eyes wide with shock, but he was staring straight ahead, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Tom didn't respond, and I could see that he was struggling to keep the car on the road. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. "It's her," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's calling to me." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "Who?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "My sister," he replied, tears welling in his eyes. "She died in a car accident on this road a year ago. I was driving. It was my fault." I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by a growing sense of dread. The voice had been so clear, so real. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. The rest of the ride was filled with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional whisper of the voice, calling out to Tom, pleading with him to come back. When we finally reached the train station, I thanked Tom and hurried out of the car, eager to escape the haunting presence that seemed to have settled over us. Tom's eyes met mine, filled with a sadness that went beyond mere grief. "She's still out there," he said, his voice breaking. "She's still waiting for me." I didn't know what to say, and I could only watch as he drove away, his car disappearing into the night. I never saw Tom again, but the memory of that night stayed with me, a haunting reminder of the thin line between life and death, love and loss. I often think about Tom and his sister, wondering if he ever found peace, if he ever managed to escape the voice that called to him from the darkness. Hitchhiking gave me a glimpse into a world I never knew existed, a world where the past can reach out and touch the present, where the dead can speak to the living. It's a world I'll never forget, and a ride I'll always remember. A ride that taught me that sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters that lurk in the shadows, but the voices that call to us from the depths of our own hearts. A voice in the night, a voice filled with pain and longing, a voice that will forever echo in my mind, a haunting reminder of a journey down a road I never thought I'd take. A ride to nowhere. It was a trip I'll never forget, a trip down a road that seemed to lead nowhere, with a hitchhiker whose existence I sometimes still question. I was returning home from a late-night party, the road stretching out in front of me like a serpent through the moonlit night. My car's headlights were the only things breaking the darkness that surrounded me. The air was still, filled with a silence that seemed almost otherworldly. Then, I saw her. A young woman standing on the side of the road, her thumb out, pleading for a ride. I would typically never pick up a stranger, especially not at that hour, but something about her looked desperate, needy. She looked like she'd been through something terrible. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked, trying to sound as friendly as possible. She nodded, her eyes wide with relief. "Yes, please, just to the next town." She got in, and I noticed her clothes were torn, and her face was pale, almost as if she had seen a ghost. Her eyes kept darting to the back seat, and I could see fear in them. "What happened to you?" I asked, concerned. I was attacked," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I managed to escape, but they might still be following me." My heart ached for her, and I pressed the gas pedal, eager to get her to safety. As we drove, she told me her name was Emily and that she had been hitchhiking to visit a sick relative when a car had picked her up. The people inside had tried to harm her, but she had fought them off and run away. The story sent shivers down my spine, and I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car following us. But the road behind was empty, swallowed by darkness. Emily seemed to calm down as we talked, and her fear seemed to subside. But something still felt off, something I couldn't put my finger on. There was a sadness in her eyes, a deep sorrow that seemed to go beyond her recent ordeal. We reached the next town, and I pulled up to the bus station. Emily thanked me profusely, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved my life." I assured her it was no trouble and watched as she walked into the station, her figure slowly disappearing into the shadows. As I drove away, a nagging doubt began to grow in my mind. Something about Emily's story didn't add up. Something about her presence felt strange. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just been part of something beyond my understanding. The next day, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to do some digging. I contacted the local police, inquiring about Emily's attack, but they had no record of any such incident. Confused and increasingly unsettled, I drove back to the bus station, hoping to find some answers. The attendant looked puzzled when I described Emily, insisting that no one matching her description had been there the night before. My mind was spinning, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Who was Emily? What had really happened that night? I spent weeks trying to unravel the mystery, but the answers seemed to slip through my fingers like sand. Emily had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a lingering sense of dread. Then one day, I stumbled across an old newspaper article. It was a story about a young woman named Emily who had been murdered while hitchhiking many years ago. The picture accompanying the article was the same Emily I'd picked up that night. I was stunned, unable to comprehend what I had read. Had I given a ride to a ghost? Had Emily's spirit reached out to me, seeking help, seeking justice? I'll never know for sure, and the mystery of that night continues to haunt me. I no longer drive that road, and I'll never pick up another hitchhiker. But sometimes, when the night is still and the moon is bright, I can't help but think of Emily and wonder if her soul is still wandering, waiting for someone to help her find her way home. And I'll always remember her eyes, those eyes filled with fear and sorrow, a reflection of a tragedy that transcends time and space, a reminder that some roads lead to destinations we can never truly understand.